Hey everybody, it's Frank Spector of frankspectorlaw.com. I'm a medical malpractice lawyer in Maryland and in DC. If you would be so kind to subscribe, hit that like button. That way you can take advantage of all my videos and it really helps me out a lot also. So today's tip for medical malpractice is, let's talk about what the difference is between a death certificate and an autopsy, because they're not the same. And in a case of wrongful death, I get a lot of questions about the difference between a death certificate and an autopsy. So let's get right into it. So a death certificate, what is that? A death certificate is when someone dies, the doctor who is there at the time of death fills out a death certificate, which is the doctor's best educated opinion as to why the person died. And that's left to a lot of the discretion of the doctor based upon the doctor's examination and maybe review of the records and the patient's history. But that's all that is. It's not an examination of the body. It's not an autopsy. So let's talk about an autopsy. An autopsy is done by a specific type of doctor called a pathologist. And that pathologist actually, and I hope I'm not getting too graphic here, where they actually examine the whole body. They open the body up and they look at all the internal organs. They look at the brain and they be able to try to make some educated opinions based upon a thorough review of the body as to what the cause of death is. So while as a death certificate is a piece of paper filled out by a doctor based upon that doctor's best educated opinion, an autopsy, on the other hand, is a more thorough evaluation of the body. So in cases of wrongful death, it can be important to be able to obtain an autopsy. Let me give you one example. In a case where someone has died from a clot, or called a pulmonary embolism, which means a clot up here in the chest that breaks off and travels up to the brain, and the person either dies or shortly after the clot breaks to the brain dies, either instantly or sometime later. In that case, a death certificate really wouldn't be that helpful in a case because it wouldn't tell us where the clot was, how big the clot was, and where the clot wound up in the brain. That would only be what can be discovered through an autopsy. So in those cases, an autopsy would be very helpful because the doctor, the pathologist, would actually, again, don't mean to be too graphic, but would open up the head, look inside the brain, and be able to see the clot, take the measurements. So without an autopsy, a embolism or clot case can be very hard to prove. Now, the last thing is, are you entitled to an autopsy? The answer is no. You're not legally entitled to an autopsy. And in most cases, an autopsy won't be offered. Autopsy is usually used in situations of foul play or whether there's serious questions about how the person died. But in most cases, an autopsy is not legally required, and a hospital doesn't have to perform an autopsy. Now, there can be private autopsy services, even though the hospital won't do an autopsy for you, you can pay for an autopsy. Problem there is those autopsies are extremely expensive. They can be in the thousands of dollars, and that may be beyond most people's budget. So just to sum up today, we talked about a death certificate versus an autopsy. A death certificate, again, is a piece of paper that the doctor fills out based upon that doctor's best educated opinion as to why the person died, whereas an autopsy is a more thorough investigation of the body done by a pathologist. It's almost like an operation where they open up the body and look at all the internal organs and to be able to have a more precise conclusion as to the cause of death. If you found this video to be helpful and informative, again, please hit that subscribe button, and I look forward to seeing you again on a future video.